In 1939, the Soviet Union unleashed its military might on Finland, a tiny neighbor, expecting a swift victory. What followed was a 105-day brutal struggle where Finland, vastly outnumbered, fought fiercely against the Soviet juggernaut. Just 20 miles from Leningrad, Joseph Stalin's deep-seated paranoia about the proximity of Finnish territory to the Soviet Union's second-largest city sparked a conflict that would defy expectations. In the late 1930s, as Europe teetered on the brink of widespread conflict, Stalin was consumed by the need to secure the Soviet Union's western borders against potential threats. This led to a particular fixation on Finland, a nation perceived as a weak link in the Soviet defensive perimeter due to its strategic location and its 1,340-kilometer-long border with the USSR. The Soviet Union's demands were initially diplomatic, but increasingly aggressive. In early negotiations, Moscow proposed swapping certain Finnish territories for Soviet land elsewhere, ostensibly to create a buffer zone around Leningrad. Specifically, the Soviets wanted the Karelian Isthmus, a piece of land crucial for the defense of Leningrad, and other territories near the Gulf of Finland. They also demanded the leasing of the Hanko Peninsula to establish a military base. In exchange, the Soviets offered territory in East Karelia, an area less strategically valuable and economically developed. Finland, valuing its sovereignty and understanding the strategic implications of losing these territories, resisted these demands, further straining relations. The tension culminated in the shelling of Manila on November 26, 1939, a mysterious and controversial event where the Soviet Union claimed that Finnish forces had attacked their troops near the village of Manila, resulting in the deaths of several soldiers. This incident was later widely considered to be a fabricated pretext by the Soviets to justify an invasion. The USSR's response was swift and severe. Claiming self-defense, they renounced the non-aggression pact signed with Finland in 1932. With the stage set for invasion, Finland braced for impact, rallying its forces against the impending Soviet onslaught. On November 30, 1939, without a formal declaration of war, the Soviet Union launched a massive offensive against Finland, initiating the Winter War. The Red Army, confident in its overwhelming numerical and technological superiority, expected a quick victory. They fielded over 450,000 troops, compared to Finland's modest 180,000. The Soviets also boasted a formidable arsenal, including thousands of tanks and aircraft, far surpassing the Finnish capabilities. However, the Finnish resilience quickly turned the tide of public opinion and military analysis. Finnish soldiers, fighting on familiar terrain and using innovative tactics such as the Motti technique, where Soviet units were isolated and destroyed piecemeal, proved devastatingly effective against the larger Soviet forces. The harsh Finnish winter further played to the defenders' advantage, hampering Soviet operations and contributing to their mounting losses. One dramatic recount comes from a Finnish sniper, Simo Häyhä, known as the White Death, who alone was credited with over 500 Soviet kills. Häyhä, like many Finns, felt a deep connection to his homeland and viewed the Soviet invasion as a critical threat to Finnish independence. His story, among others, exemplifies the fierce determination and ingenuity of the Finnish forces. Despite these efforts, the sheer scale of the Soviet military machine began to wear down Finnish resistance. By February 1940, the situation became increasingly desperate for Finland, with the Soviets breaking through the Mannerheim Line, a major defensive fortification on the Karelian Isthmus. As casualties mounted and resources dwindled, Finland faced grim prospects if the war continued without intervention. This first phase of the Winter War not only tested Finnish resolve, but also reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Northern Europe. The bravery and tenacity of the Finnish people during these initial stages of the conflict drew international admiration and support, setting the stage for a broader narrative of small nations' resistance against oppressive superpowers. As Finland prepared for further battles, the world watched, keenly aware that this small nation was not going to surrender lightly. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union launched a massive invasion into Finland, expecting a swift victory due to its overwhelming military superiority. The Red Army, boasting over 450,000 troops, was met with unexpected resistance from the Finnish forces, numbering only around 180,000. As Soviet tanks rolled across the border and planes darkened the skies, the Finns, under the command of General Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, quickly adapted to the dire situation. The Finns utilized their intimate knowledge of the terrain, engaging in guerrilla tactics and sniper warfare that baffled and decimated Soviet troops unaccustomed to the harsh Arctic conditions. The effect of Joseph Stalin's purges on the Red Army's effectiveness became starkly apparent as the poorly led Soviet forces struggled to cope with both the Finnish resistance and the brutal winter weather. Between 1937 and 1938, Stalin had purged the Red Army of many of its most experienced leaders, degrading its operational capabilities significantly. This lack of experienced leadership was evident as ill-prepared Soviet troops, dressed in summer uniforms, succumbed to temperatures plummeting to -40°C. Finnish sniper Simo Häyhä, known as the White Death, exemplified this deadly efficiency, claiming over 500 Soviet soldiers with his rifle. His exploits became legendary, boosting Finnish morale and symbolizing the fierce resistance encountered by the invading forces. At the Battle of Suomussalmi, from December 1939 to January 1940, the Finnish forces delivered one of the most humiliating defeats to the Soviet Union. 2 Soviet divisions, totaling around 45,000 men, were encircled and annihilated by just 11,000 Finnish troops. The Finns, adept at winter warfare, utilized Motti tactics, where they would cut off smaller groups of Soviet troops and destroy them in isolation. The landscape, filled with forests and swamps, turned into a labyrinth of death for Soviet soldiers. The bodies of thousands of Red Army troops littered the snow-covered battleground, stark against the white expanse, serving as a grim testament to the Finnish tactical superiority. The harsh winter played a crucial role in the conflict, acting almost as an ally of the Finnish forces. The Soviets' mechanized equipment failed in the freezing temperatures, and their supply lines became overstretched and vulnerable. Captain Arne Juutalainen, known affectionately as the Terror of Morocco due to his previous service in the French Foreign Legion, led his men in relentless hit-and-run attacks, often leaving the Soviets bewildered and demoralized. As the initial Soviet offensive stumbled, the resilience and ingenuity of the Finnish people shone brightly. Women and children helped by supplying the front lines, reinforcing the collective effort to repel the invaders. Tales of individual heroism and collective resistance permeated the Finnish society, knitting the nation together in the face of overwhelming odds. The small Finnish radio stations broadcast updates and patriotic messages, keeping the spirits high and the national resolve unbroken. As the Soviets stumbled in the snow-clad forests of Finland, the Finns fortified their defenses, cementing their positions and preparing for further assaults. The Winter War, as it came to be known, was not just a military conflict. It was a testament to Finnish tenacity and adaptability in the face of a seemingly invincible adversary. The world watched in awe, and the narrative of David versus Goliath began to take shape. The stage was set for legendary battles, such as the Battle of Kola, where Finnish forces, outnumbered and outgunned, would further demonstrate their indomitable spirit and tactical brilliance. The Mannerheim Line, a formidable defense network built across the Karelian Isthmus, became Finland's bulwark against the advancing Soviet forces during the Winter War of 1939. named after the Finnish military leader and statesman Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim. This line was not a continuous wall, but a series of reinforced concrete bunkers, trenches, and other field fortifications strategically placed to exploit the rugged terrain. It stretched approximately 135 kilometers, primarily built during the interwar period as a defensive measure against the Soviet threat. The design of the Mannerheim Line utilized the natural landscape effectively. The dense forests and frozen lakes provided natural obstacles that were augmented with barbed wire, anti-tank obstacles, and minefields, creating a lethal gauntlet for the poorly prepared Soviet troops. Finnish soldiers, skilled in ski warfare and winter combat, used the terrain to their advantage, executing guerrilla tactics and ambushes. In the harsh winter conditions, where temperatures plummeted to -40 degrees Celsius, the Finns' familiarity with the environment proved crucial. One of the most iconic figures to emerge from this conflict was Simo Häyhä, famously known as the White Death by the Red Army. Born in 1905 in Rautjärvi, near the present-day border of Finland and Russia, Häyhä's prowess as a sniper became legendary. With 505 confirmed kills, he is regarded as one of the most effective snipers in history. Using his Mosin Nagant rifle, fitted with iron sights to prevent fogging and freezing, Häyhä painted his face white, blending seamlessly with the snow-covered landscapes. His remarkable feat was achieved in just 100 days of combat, with Häyhä often lying motionless in the snow for hours at a time. Häyhä's methodical approach and ability to remain undetected were emblematic of the Finnish resistance. His personal ethos of simplicity and efficiency resonated with the Finnish troops' broader strategy of maximizing limited resources. His technique was quoted as "one shot, one kill," which signified the meticulous nature of his engagements, ensuring that each bullet counted, a crucial factor given the Finns' limited ammunition supplies. Improvised weapons, such as the Molotov cocktail, named humorously after the Soviet foreign minister Vyacheslav Molotov, became symbols of Finnish ingenuity. These simple yet effective petrol bombs were used to great effect against Soviet tanks. Villagers and civilians, including women and children, were mobilized to produce these weapons, contributing directly to the front line's supply. The collective effort highlighted a nationwide resolve to resist the Soviet juggernaut. The emotional peak of the Mannerheim Line's defense was illustrated by numerous first-hand accounts of Finnish soldiers who held their ground against overwhelming odds. One poignant narrative involves a young Finnish soldier, Aino Lada, who single-handedly repelled an entire platoon of Soviet soldiers at Irapää, a critical point along the line, before succumbing to his injuries. His last words, as reported by his comrades, were, "For Finland, the sacrifices are worth it." While the Mannerheim Line held firm, smaller Finnish units elsewhere prepared for engagements that epitomized their indomitable spirit. These instances of heroism and sacrifice were not isolated events, but part of a broader narrative of resilience and tenacity that defined the Finnish resistance against the Soviet aggression during the Winter War. This defiance, led by figures like Simo Häyhä and bolstered by the strategic use of the Mannerheim Line, underscored a narrative of a small nation's stand against a formidable foe, encapsulating the spirit of David versus Goliath in the brutal winter of Eastern Europe. In the icy expanse of eastern Finland, in December 1939, the 9th Division of the Red Army, consisting of around 45,000 men, faced an outnumbered band of approximately 11,500 Finnish soldiers under the command of Colonel Hjalmar Siilasvuo at Suomussalmi. The Finnish forces used their intimate knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, engaging in what would become a signature tactic, Motti, where smaller mobile units surrounded and isolated parts of the larger Soviet forces. This approach turned the dense forests and heavy snow into lethal traps for the Soviet troops, unaccustomed to subarctic warfare. The battle began intensely on December 7, 1939, with the Soviets attempting to cross into Finland over the Raate Road. However, they quickly encountered fierce resistance. Using ski troops to maneuver quickly across the snowy landscape, the Finns executed a series of hit-and-run attacks, disrupting the Soviet formations and leaving them disoriented and demoralized. A Finnish soldier, Martti Käkelä, recounted, "We knew every inch of the forest, and the Soviets were like strangers stumbling in the dark." As temperatures plunged to -40 degrees Celsius, the Soviet soldiers, ill-equipped for such conditions, suffered tremendously. The turning point in the battle came in early January 1940. Colonel Sailasvuo orchestrated a masterful encirclement of Soviet forces along the Raate Road. On the night of January 5th, Finnish troops, divided into small squads, silently sliced through the forest, closing in on the Soviet positions. By January 7th, the Finns had successfully divided the Soviet column into smaller segments, or motis, systematically annihilating each isolated unit. The Soviets' heavy equipment, which included tanks and artillery, became liabilities in the forested terrain, abandoned by their operators and later captured by the Finns. Eyewitness accounts from both sides convey the desperation and brutality of the conflict. Soviet Lieutenant Ivan Korovin described the scene. "We were trapped, without food, freezing. The Finns were like ghosts of the forest, hitting us and vanishing." The aftermath was grim. Thousands of Soviet soldiers lay frozen on the snowy battlefield, their equipment scattered as silent testament to their defeat. It was reported that the Finns captured valuable resources, including 43 tanks, over 70 artillery pieces, some 1,000 vehicles, and a vast amount of small arms and ammunition, which were promptly repurposed against their former owners. The victory at Suomussalmi and along the Raate Road led to significant shifts in morale. The Finnish forces, vastly outnumbered, had not only held their own, but had also inflicted severe losses on the Red Army, estimated at around 27,000 killed or wounded, compared to Finland's approximately 900 casualties. This battle exemplified the Finnish capacity to turn Soviet strengths into critical weaknesses, leveraging superior tactics, terrain familiarity, and extreme weather conditions. Colonel Hjalmar Siilasvuo emerged as a national hero, symbolizing Finnish resilience and tactical ingenuity. His leadership was pivotal in orchestrating one of the most lopsided defeats in military history against a supposedly superior opponent. He later reflected in his memoirs, "Every man knew what was at stake, and their bravery turned the tide against an overwhelming invasion." Despite these spectacular victories, the broader international landscape remained complex and largely unhelpful. The world watched, mostly from the sidelines, as this small nation grappled with a superpower. Political support was meager, material assistance was limited. These victories, while morale boosting, did little to alter the stark reality of Finland's geopolitical isolation during the Winter War. The Finnish struggle, though heroic, was a stark reminder of the limitations of small nations in a world dominated by great powers and their interests. As the Winter War raged between Finland and the Soviet Union from November 1939 to March 1940, the world looked on, often sympathetically, but its hands largely tied by geopolitical interests and limitations. The Finnish resistance captured the imaginations and hearts of people across the globe, with newspapers like the New York Times and the Times of London frequently highlighting the valor and tenacity of the Finnish fighters. Despite vast coverage, international support materialized mostly in the form of moral backing rather than substantial military aid. Countries such as Britain and France, while vocally supportive of the Finnish cause, were entangled in their own looming conflict with Nazi Germany, limiting their ability to provide significant help. Public rallies and fundraising events in cities like New York and London did raise considerable sums, But these efforts fell short of what was required to significantly alter the military balance. Britain did manage to send over 30 fighter aircraft and a few anti-tank weapons, but these contributions paled in comparison to the needs of the Finnish military, facing a much larger and better equipped Soviet force. The lack of direct military intervention by major powers can largely be attributed to the complex diplomatic landscape of the time. The Soviet Union, despite being viewed unfavorably by many Western nations for its aggression, was still a counterbalance to the rising threat of Nazi Germany. A direct confrontation with the Soviets was deemed too risky, particularly when considering the possibility of pushing them into closer cooperation with Hitler. This strategic balancing act left Finland to fend for itself, with only limited foreign material support trickling in. One particular instance of support came from Sweden, which shared cultural and historical ties with Finland. The Swedish volunteers, numbering around 8,000, crossed the border to join their Finnish kin. Their involvement was a poignant testament to Nordic solidarity, yet even this substantial gesture could not tilt the scale against the Soviet juggernaut. Accounts from Swedish volunteers, such as those penned by Sven-Erik Klinkman, a journalist and volunteer, detail the harsh winter conditions and the relentless Soviet assaults, but also the fiery spirit of the Finnish soldiers. As the war neared its conclusion, the hope that international intervention would come to Finland's rescue dwindled. The League of Nations, of which the Soviet Union was a member until expelled in December 1939 for its invasion of Finland, proved ineffective as a peacekeeping body. Its condemnation of the Soviet aggression did little beyond symbolic gestures. The harsh reality of international politics in the 20th century was that moral outrage often buckled under the weight of strategic interests. Despite the valor and resilience displayed by the Finnish forces, the overwhelming might of the Soviet military and the lack of adequate international intervention led Finland to the grim reality of the negotiation table. The Moscow Peace Treaty, signed on March 12, 1940, ceded 9% of Finnish territory to the Soviet Union, a bitter pill for the Finnish people who had fought so fiercely and won the admiration of the world. The end of the Winter War, while a tactical victory in terms of Finnish survival, was also a stark illustration of the limitations faced by smaller nations in a global arena dominated by the agendas of larger powers. As the Moscow Peace Treaty concluded the bitter conflict, Finland emerged with significant territorial losses but maintained its sovereignty. The Winter War remains a testament to Finland's resilience and strategic ingenuity, a small nation that stood defiant against a Soviet giant. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more World War II history. Thanks for watching.